It's Thursday, February 13th, and we're tracking severe tropical cyclone Zelia off the coast of Western Australia this morning. The system has rapidly intensified over the nighttime hours, unfortunately, and the system is likely going to reach an impressive peak intensity later today as a Category 5 storm. And we're going to talk about today primarily what could cause it to weaken or plateau in intensity, but also what are we looking at in terms of landfall, in terms of location, in terms of intensity, and of course, we'll talk about how the storm has done overnight as well to start things off. So let's go ahead and get started. This is the radar imagery out of Port Hedland. You can see where the eye is very clearly on this imagery and where Port Hedland is down south. Now, the system is sitting about 150, 160 kilometers offshore, and this beam height of the radar is almost about 4 kilometers in altitude by the time you get to the eye. And I'm pointing this out because you can see how clear the eye is on radar imagery, even that far out from the radar. We even have some pretty impressive returns on the radar showing up on the northern eye wall. This is showing you just how strong this eye wall is. The cloud tops in this eye are reaching extremely high into the atmosphere, and this is likely holding extreme winds of Category 5 force. And nothing is really in the way for the system to stop that strengthening trend, at least for now, that I can see. Now, one thing you also might pick out is that the system seems to be drifting off towards the east, and this is going to be a thing that we see over the next day or so as the system sits offshore. We talked about yesterday how we're going to have a frontal boundary coming in over Western Australia, and that's going to act like a wall of sort to stop the system's southward motion. And what we're going to see is the system is going to drift east, it's going to drift west, and overall, we're not going to see much movement over the next couple of days. Now, most models do see that we're going to see a little bit of southwestward motion in the long term because we are going to get some high pressure building down south that will tend to pull the system further west. But exactly how far west this gets is going to be crucial for determining where it makes landfall in northern Western Australia. If it comes a little bit further west, we could be looking at a landfall somewhere near Dampier. But if it comes, or stays rather, a little bit further east, it could end up making landfall closer to Port Hedland. Some model projections are having the system still come into Port Hedland directly, and that would be a disastrous situation if it does happen. But we have a wide array of potential solutions for landfall, and anyone along this coast, especially if you're in the cyclone warning, needs to be paying attention to this very closely. Listen to local officials and watch Bureau of Meteorology forecasts very frequently over the next few days so that you're up to date on where the system is tracking. Now, if we look at satellite imagery, we do still see some easterly shear on the east side of the storm. You can see some thunderstorms on the coast getting pushed off towards the west. There is still a light easterly shear component moving its way underneath the convection, but clearly this has not had a significant impact on the eye, and most models are not seeing this have a significant impact on the storm over the next couple of days. Really, the things to watch for plateauing or weakening is upwelling with the waters underneath, because it is stalling, and I can show you this if we look at the HAFS model. This is a specialized hurricane model showing you the water temperatures underneath the storm, and you can see we have plentiful warm water underneath it of 30 to 31 degrees Celsius. But we do see, as the system tracks slowly southwest, the water begin to upwell a little bit. We see more yellows and greens show up. And while on these model projections, we do see the system moving southwest just enough to avoid being directly over that, this still would have some bands within the storm moving over this cooler water. And that could in turn bring some drier air into the circulation, though that's not guaranteed, and the system is not guaranteed to weaken all too significantly from that. When you get upwelling like this, that weakening tends to be more gradual. Something that may cause it to weaken a little bit more than that is a potential eye wall replacement cycle. Now, once you get towards the Category 4, Category 5 intensities with these storms, you usually see that happen not too long after it reaches peak. As it stands right now, we don't see many signs of an eye wall replacement cycle that's imminent. You can see the very strong eye wall on this microwave path that we got a few hours ago. We have a couple of bands trying to wrap into this, but they're not in any way concentric bands capable of starting an eye wall replacement cycle. And if you don't know, an eye wall replacement cycle is where we have these stronger bands of thunderstorms wrap around completely, surrounding this inner eye wall. And through this process, it will, in a way, choke off the inner eye wall. And in that process, as that old eye dies, the winds tend to come down. It usually comes down about a category over the course of this cycle. Now, that may sound like good news, but it is not overly good news, because while we do get the winds to come down, the side effect of that is the system is getting larger, because you tend to get, as this band initially is much larger than the current eye and eye wall structure, you tend to get a larger eye, and that spreads out the impacts even further and causes more significant storm surge, and of course broadens the wind field for more widespread impacts along the coast. So eye wall replacement cycles are kind of deceiving. They seem good, but they are often not good. They can bring much more significant impacts here. Now, we have seen some tries today of bands wrapping around into the eastern side, though they have struggled, perhaps because of the easterly wind shear we have. What oftentimes can happen when you have light easterly shear like we have right now is that bands that try to move east get stopped by this shear and they end up degrading, and you never actually get an eye wall replacement cycle to take shape because of that. So the shear may end up helping the system more than harming it. And so what I'm trying to get at here is that the key message today in terms of intensity as we head towards landfall is that the system is not forecast to weaken appreciably. The current forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology has the system remaining a Category 5 pretty much all the way up to landfall. And we should be preparing along the coast of Western Australia for a Cat 5 landfall at this point, just given the forecast that we're seeing and the conditions in place for the system as it comes south. But of course, if it does weaken to a Category 4, don't let that weakening deceive you. A Category 4 is still extremely powerful, and we could still see catastrophic damage come from a Category 4 storm. Just because it comes down to category doesn't mean it's overly better. It is better than a Cat 5, I'll give you that, but in terms of impacts, it is still pretty bad. Now, in terms of steering, when are we actually going to get this system into the coast? I mentioned that it was going to sit here off the coast for a couple of days. If we look at the big scale water vapor imagery, and I'll refresh this so we get the latest imagery, you can see what we talked about happening last night happening in reality. We have this big trough south of Australia now pushing east, and this is being replaced by high pressure in southwestern Australia. You can see this if you look at the mid-layer flow on the GFS, showing you this boundary that is sort of acted like a wall for the storm, keeping it offshore. But also we have this southerly flow on the eastern extent of a high pressure system over the Indian Ocean. These two features are going to work together to keep this system offshore. Now, as it does build, as this ridge builds over southwestern Australia, we may see a drift towards the west, and models are uncertain exactly how far west this system gets. Models like the European and the Canadian don't pull it too far west, and as a result, we have a landfall on those models closer to Port Hedland. But models like the GFS, it comes out further east, or further west, sorry, and you can see that on the model, and we end up getting a landfall closer to Dampier. Dampier on this map is about here, and that's where the system makes landfall on this forecast. So it's going to be very fragile to see exactly where the landfall spot occurs. But regardless, anyone really in the cyclone warning area needs to be preparing as if this system is going to make landfall in your area. And like I said, at this point, probably prepare for a Category 5, because the system is probably going to be around that intensity by the time the system comes ashore, and that is something you got to be prepared for. And you can see that on the forecast from the Bureau of Meteorology, that cyclone warning has been extended further west, now including areas like Dampier, but it goes all the way up the coastline, well east of Port Hedland, just showing you the extent of the potential conditions we could see from the cyclone. But you can see the forecast there, intensifying to a Category 5 today and staying a Category 5 into landfall. And especially along and east of where the center makes landfall. This is going to be the most dangerous spot for landfall because what we're going to have is strong winds of a Category 5 cyclone, but also storm surge. And you can kind of see it if we look at the visible imagery. Port Hedland is about here, and the shape of the coastline is a little bit concave. It's also a little concave down here closer to Dampier. So if you have the system coming in a trajectory like this, like the Bureau of Meteorology forecast shows, this concave coast may work in the storm surge's favor of getting its way into inland areas more effectively. And we may see more of a significant storm surge event occur if the system does come just west of Port Hedland. But even if the system does come directly in, we could have very significant damage from the system as you'll be dealing with Category 5 force winds. So that's all that I've got for the cyclone. I will leave links to the Bureau of Meteorology web page in the description at the top of there, so you can get to their website and see the latest weather information on the storm. I'll have more uploads on my channel throughout the week as the system continues towards landfall, and I'll also post on my Twitter page updates on how the system is doing over the next couple of days, so we can watch those more short-term trends and see if we could potentially get some good news out of this. Because as of right now, this is all bad news, and this is really the worst-case scenario for a storm coming into Western Australia. So stay safe as the system starts to come into the coastline, and that's all for now. Thanks for watching.